Good morning. So a couple things I want to talk about. First, our design, where we're at in our design of Space Age of Man, and I want to talk about some things related directly to that. But I also want to talk about some observations, again, awareness about system and impact on play. So first, Dale and I in the last 4 days have made huge jumps and strides. We went from early playtest ideas, kind of using the Dark Age of Man rule set, to um, dealing more with how are we going to create in character as character seat for me in particular, because I was frustrated with how can I get to this, how am I going to be able to be in this state, depending on what the GM's doing and how the system asks me to play. And so we're going through some of that. But then last week I said, listen, we gotta throw all this shit out. I want to go back to playing one of my favorite rule sets, a simple rule set, and just we're just going to do our style. We're going to do the thing that we began to develop before we started writing Dark Age of Man, and get back to this state of play that Dell and I have been working toward for years. And for 4.5 hours for us, can't say this, can't speak to the viewer, but for us was almost flawless for execution of how we want to communicate, how we want to utilize the device to achieve outcomes toward continued narrative play. For me, how I want the naive narrator seat to evolve, right? So we're sticking with our naive narrator concepts, but what's the evolution from Dark Age of Man to Space Age of Man? How is the naive narrator seat going to be tweaked and changed? I've talked a little bit about that with the use of a simple complication dice. I've talked a little bit about how things have to be set up for the players to be in the right headspace to engage actively the world, the setting, in atmosphere, and less concern about me driving the narrative or pulling them along, goading them along so much as they know what they're trying to do and they know the environment, and complications will come up. Um, Also, one of the key changes is we're going to make sure that the naive narrator is actively involved in combat now, so the naive narrator will make combat rolls against PCs or opposed rolls against PCs, depending on what it is, right? So we're going to get the naive narrator free of we're going to free up the naive narrator to be even more naive by using complications and environment. So if I know the environment, I know all the variables, then it's really easy for me to create risk reward through complications. They know the same things, like they're going to know certain things, right? And they're going to recognize risk reward through how it's impacting the environment around them or them personally, etc. Right? And then this is going to free me up to also continue to enjoy rolling dice as a GM as far as combat, for instance. Okay. So these were huge moves, and for this to happen, we have to look at how we want to communicate and how we want players to be fully engaged in character as character, and moving forward, constantly moving, because it's a live game. And to do that, we want that system to be active all the time, but able to in an instant get a result, so we can continue to narrate forward with success, or we can continue to narrate obstacles, situations, circumstance, succession due to failure. And that means it's a system that's technically running all the time, but it's so easy for them to pick up the die and drop the die to know whether they've succeeded or failed, right? And yes, it'll be pass-fail system, super simple, because again, we don't want them spending their actual player in character as character energies on processing mechanics. So this brings me to this simple analogy. I say to you, I'm going to teach you how to float, and then I'm going to teach you how to swim, and I'm going to teach you how to swim efficiently, how you're going to breathe, how you're going to kick your feet, how you're going to rotate your arms, and I'm going to teach you to glide through the water at your best ability. And you're going to be able to do this even if the water's rocky or smooth, but I'm going to teach you how to be an efficient and effective swimmer. But I'm going to first hang a 25-pound weight around your neck that you'll have to wear for the rest of your life, especially when you get in the water. This is what game systems are doing for players as characters, and toward a narrative style of play. When I say narrative, we're not storytelling, right? Narrative meaning we're using detailed, descriptive, from first person perspective kind of play live. I am John kicking the door open, and oh, there's a Nazi. The Nazi lowers his gun at you and fires two shots. Roll to hit. Oh, you've been wounded. And he continues to tell the tale. I sprint across the room and tackle the Nazi. We roll the dice. He sprints across the room. He succeeds. We tackle the Nazi. Right? The Nazi has one wound. That tackles a successful hit. That you've knocked the Nazi. You've slammed him into the wall, knocked him out cold. He's no longer in play. However, I describe that, and he's up, looking around, going, "Okay, what else is in this room?" Right? The system's constantly running because then there's also me checking complications as he moves through the space, right? And then, of course, the complication is a Nazi with a gun. He deals with it, and then he decides his next plan of action. And so the system is not being referenced, and we're not spending processing power as players on the system and on the details of the thing toward sharing our next action, declaring our next move, which is emergent play, which is going to create an emergent story through the results of play, right? These variables consist of me as the GM and players as characters, right? Those are the key variables for how we're going to see and encounter play space that is going to ultimately, out of those actions, out of those reactions, is going to create results, and those results are going to end up being the thing that drives in a left, right, forward, backward, and eventually we look back and say, wow, interesting emergent story out of that data, all from live action, from our character's perspective in character. And Dell has to do very little reaching. His agency is in his ability to understand the environment he's around and hit the actions he wants to take and the direction he wants to go. That's it. That's complete agency for him, right? I'm just the world and the setting governing potential problems, right? And adjudicating, obviously, rules, as they arise, right? As far as you've had too many wounds, you're dead, right? I have to enforce that. Sorry, Dale, you've taken 4 wounds, you're dead now, whatever. If we use wounds, but I mean, if we use hit points, so to speak. But it gets you thinking about how are we getting here? We're getting here by creating a unique system that streamline it stream that allows play to constantly be. If we have to make 4 rolls in a roll, it'll never be anything other than you pick up the die, you make the roll, and then you respond to that result. They may not roll the dice in a 2 hour period. They may roll the dice many times in a combat or whatever, right? So, but it's going to be almost instant for them to understand the ramifications of the simple die roll. No processing power, right? So they are going to be learning how to be efficient swimmers in any environment, and we're not going to hang a 25-pound anchor around their neck every time they get in the water. And that is exactly what most traditional games do. We are not going to have a novelty that the game plays towards. So when I talk about traditional games, what is my other issue with traditional games? They all have a novelty game mechanic that ultimately you are driven to. Sanity check, combat, panic rolls. There's some kind of mechanical novelty that ultimately your characters are orbiting. And so we know it's not just the genre that is part of this mechanic, but very often to control behavior and control the feel of the genre, we create a mechanic that is a contrivance toward feeling like we're in a Wild Wild West game or a pulp game, right? And a mechanic like from pulp to grit can be simple as how much damage do they take, how much damage do they do, how easy is it to kill an individual, how hard is it to kill an individual. Just those mechanics being tweaked changes something from pulpy to gritty, right? We know that's a simple tweak to change a pulp feel to create a pulpy feel or a gritty feel or a simulation feel. We're going to measure cover. We're going to measure how many bullets we shoot. That creates more of a simulation feel. Whether the game is meant to be a simulation or not, details create a more simulation environment. So I say again when I talk about traditional games, what are they really doing? Well, Call of Cthulhu says we're not only going to say we can't do Cthulhu-esque Lovecraftian horror with D&D, so we're going to invent a game and we're going to create mechanics that support the genre of Lovecraftian horror, right? But inevitably, I'm a character in your Lovecraftian tell, and I am ultimately being funneled toward the novelty mechanic of sanity, as opposed to me being an investigator in 1942, small town in Alabama, investigating supernatural occurrences that may or may not lead to me encountering creatures or horrors that would actually affect me. The fact that the device is there means we know we're playing toward that end game. We're playing toward that device being paramount in the experience, as opposed to me being a character engaged in a place, in a genre, in an atmosphere, and everything I do is within the game space. And so therefore I can easily adjudicate that and easily use that game space because it's a live game. And oh, by the way, there's not some novelty mechanic that we know is ultimately where our characters are going to find themselves driven to or into. D&D, they're driven to the loop. The loop is great character. I see what I can and cannot do. Engage in combat, gain experience, get treasure, and do it again and again and again. Does that mean we're not having these amazing little stories? And no, again, I don't want to get into whether those games aren't packed full of juicy narrative and they're not packed full of characterization and they're not packed full of, but we are driven toward combat. It's all about combat. I don't care how you tonight choose to say today we're gonna feast with the king and it's gonna be about you getting to know all the other lords in the region and what their game is. Tonight's a political intrigue. Yeah, but that's a contrivance because you're telling me my agency is limited to dressing formally and just engaging in chitter chatter and learning what I can for a 2.5 hour session. My agency is contrived. The contrivance of the setting dictates, where I'm going to be doing tonight, right? And I have to tell you, we're not going to be in combat tonight. You're going to be at a river, right? So none of you, you're all here at a banquet. None of you have your armor and your swords and stuff. They're all back at and here and go. They create environments in which we constantly have to contrive the space, whether it's written in a tome of a rule book to contrive the nature of this genre, this space that we're going to do every night, or just tonight I'm outlining the restrictions upon your characters so we can have this political intrigue at a feast with the king and his lords. You are going to be attending the king's banquet and you're going to witness the king with his closest knights, etc. And you're going to learn some things, hopefully, right? And then next week, you're going to suit up and go out and deal with something you learned at this, right? Which is fine, right? But the game's not designed necessarily for that, right? So it strikes me that I said it before. You want people to be a character. You want them to engage the genre, engage the world, engage the fiction that we share. But inevitably, your mechanics aren't in tune with also that, but also the style of how you want the game to go. And of course, Dale and I have a particular attitude about the style that we want to be in character, moving forward, live. Everything's live. There are no turns. There are no procedures. There's just a character responding to information, taking action, moving forward, and then constant feedback. It's a loop of feedback. Sometimes that feedback is going to be there's going to be a hurdle in that feedback due to a complication or due to an action that they've taken in which they've succeeded or they failed. Will create another direction of the branch. So at Dark Age of Man, we had this idea: you set a seed, and then from that seed, we watch a tree grow, and from that tree and those branches growing, we end up starting here, and we end up who knows where by the end of our session or the end of 5 sessions or whatever. So Dell and I are basically now saying, um, it's more like points of light, and you are floating among these points of light in which your character, you know, does something, goes a direction toward a point of light, and that point of light, can become another point of light, or you can get to that point of light, but something has happened along the way, etc. So, point of light's not a good analogy here, but my point is, So in just 4 days, we've made huge strides toward how that mechanic is going to be implemented, how fluid, how easy, how invisible that mechanic will be implemented. That mechanic, the game itself is technically always in play because that mechanic could come up, constant, could come up instantly, could come up right now, right here, because you did something or I rolled a complication that creates an environment in which you're gonna have to make a check, right? But you're just your character moving through the space, engaged in the fiction, live, taking initiative. Not waiting to roll initiative because you want to get in combat with the goblins. No, you take initiative and you move through the space. Hopefully informed by what you know as a character. I know I'm on a space station. I know that there are 452 people here. I know that there are three factions kind of at odds with each other politically and economically. And I happen to know three people in all these factions, and we're good friends, although they certainly take sides when the tribes are at war. I know the captain. I know the security specialist. I am friends with the doctor or whatever. And I know that the space station is headed for shutdown. The corporation that runs the space station has warned us all that in 31 days we're shutting down. So you need to get packed up, and you need to good luck. You need to find a way off, and you need to find another job. So they're now dealing with the fact that, oh man, my life's about to be flipped upside down, and they're all looking for jobs, looking for a way off the space station. They got so much time to do it. They got a mission to do, right? But along the way, a complication arises that might affect that data, right? But it might just affect the fact that it turns out when they show up to interview for the shuttle pilot job to get off this space station, take a job with a command ship. There's 16 other people here to apply for the job. That's a complication, right? And so again, I'm using mundane stuff, but the point is, you can see how easily it will be for us to put a complication in front of them as they are headed toward a directive. And by the way, any challenge that comes up is simply adjudicated with a simple drop of the dice. And they know the data. They're not going to do a lot of character sheet looking because the data, they're going to know the data. They won't need to look at their character sheet and say, okay, I've got a 16 in blah, right? And they won't have to process, should I use this or should I use that? Is it a 16 or do I need above a 16? That we are going to be making it so universal and so easy for them to do that they'll be able to continue through the success roll or the fail roll, either from feedback from me or them taking charge. They'll know when they failed. They'll be able to very easily narrate how they failed. If or I can step in and narrate the results, or vice versa. So we'll be able to do the hot potato, easy handoff based on the situation, right? They won't know with success whether they've killed the goon, the alien creature, but they know with success that they at least affected the alien creature. I will have to explain how and when the creature dies. They don't have that purview, right, to tell me he's dead, or that purview to know without me saying, okay, you killed him. Go ahead and narrate that, which is what I would do in D&D. I'd say, oh, cool, you killed him. I want you to narrate how you killed him, to involve the player in the space. But the reality was they had to wait and find out if you killed him, and then they'd have to get a cue from me that it was okay for them to do that. We're going to be in a dance here. We're going to be in a handshake here. Dell and I devised Dark Age of Man to be an improvisational role-playing game, but we still hung an anchor around your neck with DV, right? And with a little more system mechanics, but certainly by having DV, right? DV creates a negotiation. It creates a unknown for the players as they drop the dice. They may or may not know what they must get. I either can tell them, or I can hint that it's hard, or Dell would never tell you what the number was. He would say, well, it's kind of hard, and then Dell would kind of narrate to let you know if you succeeded or not. That works for many people. I would very often, because I know players want to know what the hell they want to kind of anticipate whether they've how they're going to feel when they pass or fail. Again, we're talking about the psychology of gamers, so I would often tell them you need a 7 or better here, so they can relax, roll the die, and know immediately whether they succeeded or not. They may not have power to narrate what that looks like, but they at least takes away some anxiety, because traditional gaming has created this environment of where there is much anxiety among players. especially in games like D&D, where you always are up against the sense that you are in a competition with the GM or a competition with the monsters at least, and that the whole world is always working against you, right? So these environments create anticipation, and they create mystery, but they also create anxiety. And players are doing more thinking about or analytic paralysis analysis about a thing because of what they don't know, and because their system may or may not support them understanding the probabilities easily, or the system being too weighty in that I'm not only am I having to roll these dice and decipher a processing power to decipher whether I pass or fail, but whether it's a partial success or a full success, whether this success means something toward the actual resolution now or in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes, right? And so I think all of these things have become Dell and I's bailiwick. They become the thing we are preoccupied by. And we've made those strides through the first development of Dark Age of Man. And now we know what we love about Dark Age of Man and what it is and how it exists and what it does well. But the next phase being not only a different genre, science fiction, but also wanting to take our style of play to the next level. And that means, again, crafting a even more fluid, um, universal, simple system for improvisate to be key to their play, and to improvisational response from both me with my complication role and them with their chosen actions and declarations in which I have to respond as the world, as the creature, as the setting. And then dice rolls will, of course, maybe dictate those resolutions of those conflicts or not. And I promised you would learn how to float. I promised you would learn how to breaststroke. Uh, I promised you would learn how to kick. I promised you would learn how to breathe. And then I promised you would be able to swim efficiently and effectively through just about any environment of water. And I didn't hang an anchor around your neck every time you got in the water, right? And this is the thing that we are again trying to take our ideas to the next level, right? And how we want people to engage the character's headspace, engage communication with the rest of the party, the team, the crew, the group, the magic circle, the GM, and the last piece, how naive we really want the naive narrator to be, and what kind of tools the naive narrator can have that are easy to use, that inform them quickly to change so they can keep up with the direction of players and in context, right? And so that's the next phase of the naive narrator tweaks, right? And so I'm excited because in 4 days we had a couple of breakthroughs, especially mechanically. Dell has a brilliant little mechanic. It's got some things we've got to iron out. My number one worry about the mechanic, as smooth as it is, it sets all. It has one thing that I've really got to play test and I got to get my head around because I'm not certain how that's going to feel. Both fictional, in the fiction of because there's a relativity problem here, right? And I think what it can do is it can render the danger of a black hole sucking the ship in equal to the danger of picking a lock, a difficult lock. And that's a problem for, even though it could all be relative based on the moment in time in which you're trying to pick the lock is just as important to you to get into the locked room as it is to somehow get the ship out of a sucking black hole, right? But in scene, fine. In overall impact of wow, it's hard to believe that picking this lock was as difficult and as dangerous as that black hole was 2 sessions ago. And that could become not only a relativity problem, right? It could become a narrative problem. It could become where the players start going, wait a minute. So so we have some kinks to work out, I think. Maybe not. I think it could work beautifully because it's all relative to your narrative, right? It doesn't matter that the lock difficulty is identical to the alien man-eating creature because it's relative to the space that you're fighting for your life against the creature versus trying to pick the lock, which is not life-threatening. So the black hole's life-threatening. The lock isn't. fixing the piloting computer is not life-threatening unless it happens to be connected to why you can't pilot away right this second from the black hole, which is life-threatening. So getting that computer fixed so somebody can pilot the ship away out of danger becomes becomes the threat of the black hole, right? And then there could be potentially other complications, right? That could arise. So, but yeah, 4 days. Dell introduced this mechanic a week ago, more than 10 days ago. And we just hadn't had time to really sit down and flesh it out. I wrote it all down. I got it all typed up. Matter of fact, we've got already an outline for everything. Mechanics, character, gen, outline for the book. We've got much of the setting in place. We've got much of we got the whole timeline in place for this science fiction from 1958 all the way up to 2023. Our setting takes place in 2067 is when it starts. So there's 40 years there's 30 to 40 years of fictional time there, which we could fill in some fictional information. But we have an actual timeline, right? And we have our world, our setting. Um, we're devising Xeno bestiary and threats, kind of a threats setting, and a Xeno a bestiary type of thing as well, and how that functions in the mechanic. So the GM can easily, again, use a simple die roll to tell me a complication. And I know from glancing at a creature or at something I've created pre-session, right? Because there can be pre-suppression. There's no reason that you would not prep like I did in our game last Saturday. I had grunt Nazis. I have tougher. I had tutser. I had mook Nazis. I had tougher Nazis, and I had pretty serious super soldiers. And dealt encountered all three. So of course you prep the potential things that could come up in session, like a simple soldier or a more advanced soldier or a super soldier type thing, right? Um, so there's being naive doesn't have to not. I mean, you need to know the setting, you need to know the environment, you need to understand the genre, you need to know what's going on, risk reward, to be everything to be in context. But you don't know. You have zero. Not only do you not know that there's no story here, there's just them acting toward a goal to achieve something that they want to do or that they've been asked to do or that they need to do. Um, and you're utterly naive about that thing. Only the variables of the world, right? Will they engage in, and then of course complications become a random event, right? And those are cued by what the players do in session live, right? Um, when you make those rolls, they're cued by the player's actions, right? You don't just randomly pick up the dice and just roll it all the time. You're going to do it at certain key moments that are going to be triggered by what players say, or the next direction players take, or the next action players take. And so you'll know that that prompts a potential complication every time they take an action, right? So anyway, it's been a fascinating 4 days because we've got a lot down. And now we have something we are going to actually play test. So our next session that Dell and I do will be play testing this exact system and this exact play style. So for those who are interested in where we're going with the naive narrator GM role and where we're going with this system for characters, for players to be in character as character live and also have really a lot of agency toward how they go about things. Pay attention to that if you're interested in where Space Age of Man is is as Space Age of Man starts to get more focused, right? So anyway, everybody out there have a wonderful weekend. What's left of it, I guess. What is it, Sunday? Yeah. So anyway, everybody have a good week, upcoming week. All right. Bye.